A lonely tailor found a giant woman living among the trash, dressed in rags, and rejected by everyone. Moved by something he did not even understand himself, he sewed her a white dress. What seemed like a simple act of compassion triggered an ancient, forgotten tradition. The next morning, 500 warriors surrounded the town. No one was prepared for what they would demand. Some people are born into a world that has no place for them. Janelle was one of those people. When Saul saw her for the first time, she was crouched behind the general store, searching for discarded vegetable scraps like a hungry animal. Saul noticed 3 things immediately. Her clothes were nothing but torn rags held together with worn leather strips. Her body was enormous, monstrously muscular, imposing enough to make grown men instinctively step back. And her eyes carried an ancient shame, the kind that grows when you are treated like a monster for so long that you end up believing it yourself. What Saul did not yet know was that the woman eating scraps in the alley was actually royalty. He also did not know that what she would do in the coming days would trigger an ancient tradition that would bring 500 warriors to his door and change both their lives forever. The afternoon sun beat down strongly as Saul closed the door to his tailor shop. 3 years of working alone had taught him to appreciate silence. The loss of his wife still weighed on his chest, like a constant pain that didn't disappear even after long hours hunched over his Singer sewing machine. He had built a life of routine and solitude in that small frontier settlement. He felt proud of his craft, though the townspeople whispered about the strange man who lived above his shop and never remarried. As he carried a basket of fabric scraps to the burn pile, he heard a sound, a low, desperate moan coming from behind Oris's general store. Saul stopped, gripping the handle of the basket tightly. The sound came again, and this time he recognized it for what it was. Hunger. The kind of hunger that eats you from the inside until dignity becomes a luxury you can no longer afford. He set down the basket and walked slowly toward the narrow alley between the buildings. The smell hit him first, dirty skin, old sweat, and something else, fear. When he rounded the corner, he saw her. She was huge, easily over 6 feet tall. Her shoulders were broader than most of the men he knew. Her arms were thick, her hands bore scars and calluses from hard work, but what gripped his chest were the rags. What she wore could not be called clothing, pieces of canvas and leather barely held together, leaving sun-darkened skin exposed over powerful muscles. Her long black hair fell in tangled strands around a face that could have been beautiful, if not marked by hunger and bruises. She tried to stand to flee, but her legs shook, and she stumbled against the wall. When she saw him approaching, her eyes widened in panic. Her hands rose instinctively to protect herself, and Saul saw fresh cuts across her knuckles. Someone had beaten her recently, or she had beaten them. Saul raised his hands slowly, palms open, making no sudden moves. He had learned that dealing with frightened animals on his small property outside town. People weren't so different when they had been cornered too many times. "Calm down," he said softly. "I'm not here to cause you trouble." Her eyes moved past him, searching for escape routes. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her gaze, the sharp alertness of someone who had learned to read danger in every shadow. She didn't speak, but her breathing was rapid and shallow. Then Saul noticed something else. The way her enormous body seemed to fold in on itself, trying to make itself smaller, invisible. It was a heartbreaking sight. A woman built like a warrior trying to disappear. He slowly reached into his vest pocket and took out the jerky and bread he had wrapped for his evening meal. He placed it on the ground between them and took 3 steps back. "Seems like you need it more than I do." She looked at the food, then at him, suspicion written in every line of her face. Saul could almost hear her thoughts. What does he want? What is the price? Nothing is free, not for someone like her. "No strings," Saul said, reading her doubt. "Just food, that's all." For a long moment, neither moved. Then her stomach betrayed her with an audible growl. Her jaw tightened, and something like shame crossed her face, but hunger won over pride. She lunged forward, grabbed the food, and retreated to the opposite wall in a single fluid motion. Her movements had a strange grace, despite the desperation. She tore the bread with strong white teeth, barely chewing, never taking her eyes off him. Saul watched her eat, with the intensity of someone who doesn't know when their next meal will come. He had seen that look before, in the first days after his wife's death, when grief had stolen his appetite for weeks. But this was different. This was someone who had been living on the edge of survival for far too long. "When was the last time you ate well?" he asked. She paused mid-bite, studying him with those dark, piercing eyes. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she swallowed and spoke. Her voice was rough, seldom used, with an accent Saul couldn't identify. 4 days, maybe 5. The simple honesty of those words hit harder than any sad story. No excuses, no pleas, just raw truth. If you don't want to miss our content, hit the like button and subscribe using the button below. Also, turn on the notification bell and tell us in the comments where you're listening from. We appreciate your support. "Do you have anywhere to sleep tonight?" Saul asked softly. Janelle's laugh was brief and bitter, without any real joy. "The woods," she replied. "When the men at the saloon don't try to chase me out." Saul also felt something stir in his chest, a decision taking shape before he had fully thought it through. He had spent 3 years carefully isolating himself, protecting against pain, refusing to let anyone into his life. But looking at that woman whom the world had decided did not even deserve basic human dignity, he remembered something his wife used to whisper to him on quiet nights. "We are as good as the way we treat those who can give us nothing in return." The words returned to him with painful clarity, resonating in the void he had built around himself over years of carefully cultivated solitude. "I have a workshop," he heard himself say, "attached to my shop. It's dry and warm. You could stay there tonight." Suspicion returned to Janelle's eyes, sharper than before. "Why?" It was a fair question. In her world, kindness often came with hidden fangs. "Because it's going to rain," Saul replied, looking at the dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "And why do I have space? What do you want in return?" Janelle asked with direct frankness. No games, no theatrics, just the survival instinct honed by hard experiences. "Nothing you're not willing to give," he said carefully. "A safe place to sleep. That's all I offer." Janelle studied him for a long moment, weighing his words against every betrayal she had probably suffered. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. As Saul turned to guide her back to his shop, he caught movement out of the corner of his eye. 3 men were standing at the mouth of the alley, their faces twisted with barely concealed disgust and repulsion. The one at the front was named Samuel Bridger. He owned the land office and considered himself the moral authority of the settlement. Saul called out to him in a voice full of feigned concern. "Stay away from that creature. She's dangerous." The woman behind him tensed visibly, and Saul felt Janelle preparing to flee, every muscle loaded with restrained tension. But something inside him had already made a decision. Maybe it was 3 years of accumulated solitude. Maybe it was grief pushing him towards something dangerously like purpose. Or maybe it was simply the fact that he had looked into her eyes and seen a person where everyone else saw a problem. "She comes with me," Saul said quietly but firmly. "And anyone who has a problem with that can tell me directly." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken threat, but Saul held his ground without taking a single step back. After a moment, Samuel spat on the ground and turned away, followed by his companions. But they would remember. Small towns always remembered. When Saul turned, Janelle looked at him with an expression he could not read. There was gratitude, disbelief, and something else. Something dangerously close to hope, trying to remain hidden. "Let's go," he said softly, before they decided to cause another scene. As they walked down the back streets toward his workshop, Saul could not shake the feeling that he had just stepped onto a path without a clear destination. Janelle moved beside him like a silent shadow. Her enormous figure made no sound, despite the loose gravel under her feet. Professional silence. The kind of silence learned when being seen means being hurt, but neither of them knew what had just been set in motion. The first drops of rain began to fall, gently striking the dust. A simple act of unexpected mercy had already triggered something that had been waiting a long time in the halls of fate. Something that had been waiting for this exact, improbable pair to awaken. and by the next morning, the entire settlement would be surrounded by 500 mounted warriors. All of them would come for the woman, walking silently beside him. All of them would come for what Saul was about to do with his needle, his thread, and his refusal to see a monster where there was a person. The workshop smelled of leather, cotton, and machine oil. Janelle stood in the doorway as if waiting for permission to breathe. Her enormous figure seemed too large for the space, though the room was spacious. Saul realized she had probably spent so much time being told she took up too much space that she had learned to make herself small, even when it was no longer necessary. He lit 2 oil lamps that spread a warm light. The illumination revealed the work table where fabric samples rested, carefully stacked. His Singer sewing machine sat in a corner, the pedal worn by years of constant use. Shelves covered the walls, filled with spools of thread of every color, buttons sorted by size, and measuring tapes coiled like sleeping snakes. "You can sit wherever you want," Saul said, pointing to a sturdy wooden bench. Janelle moved with careful precision, each step calculated not to knock anything over. When she finally sat down, the bench creaked but held. She kept her eyes lowered, hands together, like a child awaiting punishment. Saul busied himself with the firewood, giving her time to adapt to the place. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but was heavy with questions neither knew how to ask. When the fire caught, the heat began to spread. He filled a basin with water from the outside pump and placed it next to her, along with a clean cloth and a bar of soap. Simple gestures that shouldn't feel revolutionary, but somehow were. "You can wash if you want," he said. "I'll be at the work table. I have orders to finish." He turned deliberately, giving her privacy. Behind him, he heard the soft splashing of water, careful movements of someone washing quickly, efficiently, as if she could lose the opportunity at any moment. When the sound stopped, he waited a full minute before turning back. Janelle had cleaned her face and hands, revealing bronze-colored skin beneath the accumulated dirt. The bruises stood out more clearly, fresh ones along her jaw and cheekbones, older, yellowed ones along her forearms. Her hair was still tangled but cleaner, falling past her shoulders in thick, dark waves. Yet it was her body that told the real story. In the now better distributed light, Saul could fully see her build. Muscles that most men would envy, shoulders capable of carrying enormous weights effortlessly. Arms that had worked hard for years. Still, the rags she wore were so inadequate they barely covered her body. Strips of canvas tied with leather cords, torn fabrics that might once have been a skirt. Nothing fit her size. The question left Saul's mouth before he could stop it. "Why don't you have proper clothes?" Janelle lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time since they had entered the workshop. "Because nothing fits me. Never has." The simple truth of those words hung heavily in the air. Saul thought of all the dresses in his shop, of the women he had measured over the years. The standard sizes assuming bodies within acceptable ranges. Janelle existed outside those ranges, outside what people considered normal or worthy of belonging. "My mother tried," Janelle continued in a low but firm voice. "When I was young, she stayed up sewing night after night. But I kept growing. The people in my village started calling me a monster. My mother defended me until the day she died. After that, there was no one left to see me as a human being." Saul put down the shirt he had been finishing. "Your village. Where was it?" 3 days west, in the high mountains," she replied, pausing as if to consider how much to reveal. "My people have lived there for more generations than can be counted, but they haven't wanted me there for 2 years. Because of how I look. Because of what I refuse to do." That distinction was clear in her deep, clear voice. Saul could feel that this was not just about appearance. Before he could ask more, heavy footsteps sounded on the exterior stairs. Firm boots, multiple pairs, then 3 sharp knocks on the door. They were not friendly knocks, they were demanding, full of intent. Janelle stood instantly, every muscle tensing with impressive speed. Saul recognized the look immediately, the look of prey about to flee. He raised a hand calmly, signaling her to stay calm. He walked to the door and opened it, just enough to block the view of the interior. Samuel Bridger stood on the landing with 2 other men from the settlement, all with rigid faces disguising personal violence as justice. "We need to talk about that thing you brought to town," Samuel said bluntly. "Her name is Janelle," Saul replied firmly, "and she stays in my workshop, which is on my property. That's none of your business. It becomes our business when you hide dangerous elements. We have families here, children. That creature could hurt someone." Behind Saul, Janelle held her breath, audible even to him. "She's a person," Saul responded, a new hardness in his voice. "And unless you have real evidence of a crime, you have no right to be here accusing." Samuel's jaw tightened visibly at the response. "You're making a mistake. When something happens, it will be your responsibility. Then it will be my responsibility." Saul took a firm step forward. "Now get off my property." The three men froze for a few seconds. Finally, Samuel stepped back. "Don't say we didn't warn you," he muttered before turning away. Saul closed the door and secured it with the bolt. The sound of the latch felt definitive, heavy. When he turned, Janelle was leaning against the wall, her body trembling. It wasn't fear, it was pure rage, barely contained. "That's why I live in the woods," she said, her voice breaking. "Why? How can it matter if I sleep in the cold?" "Because wherever I go, they see a monster, a threat, something that must be expelled." "I don't see a monster," Saul said softly. Janelle let out a bitter laugh, joyless. "You'll see, everyone does sooner or later." Saul went to the shelves and pulled down a roll of sturdy cream-colored cotton, then another in pale blue, spreading them carefully on the work table and smoothing them out. "What are you doing?" Janelle asked cautiously. "Taking your measurements," he replied. "If you allow me." She looked at him as if he had just spoken another language. "Why?" "Because you deserve something that fits you, something that makes you feel human instead of hidden." For a long moment, Janelle did not move. Then, slowly, she stepped away from the wall. She walked to the work table with careful steps. Her eyes shone with something like contained moisture, but she refused to let it show completely. Saul did not know that such a simple offer was about to unleash something enormous. Nor did he know that the traditions of her people dictated that whoever dresses you with honor becomes bound to you in ways beyond mere kindness. Taking Janelle's measurements felt like disarming a trap. Every time Saul's hands approached, she flinched, small, involuntary movements speaking of too many hands that had grabbed instead of asking permission. He worked slowly, announcing each measurement aloud. He maintained his touch professional, brief, careful. Her shoulders were broader than any man he had ever fitted. Her arms were thick with muscle, her waist surprisingly narrow despite her physical power. When he measured her height, the tape showed over 6 feet. Janelle remained completely still throughout the process, eyes fixed on the opposite wall, breathing shallow, as if holding each heartbeat. "You can relax," Saul said softly. "Almost done." "I'm not good at relaxing," she replied. He could believe it. The tension was etched into every line of her posture, like a spring always about to snap. When he finally stepped aside and recorded the last measurement, she sagged slightly, letting out a barely contained sigh of relief. "How long will it take?" she asked cautiously. Saul considered the numbers, calculating mentally. "A dress this size will need more fabric than usual, more time, more precision. 2 days, maybe 3 if I work calmly." Janelle nodded, accepting the answer without protest. "I'll leave before then." "Leave where?" "Somewhere else, where I haven't yet been judged a threat." She said it with the naturalness of someone who had repeated that phrase too many times. Stay until the atmosphere turns hostile, then disappear. Survival based on constant movement. Saul set down the measuring tape and looked at her directly. "And if you didn't have to keep running, the world wouldn't work like that," he said. "Not for someone like me." "People like you," Saul repeated softly. "Do you mean different people?" Janelle shook her head slowly. "I mean people who scare others just by existing." Her words carried no anger, only deep, ancient weariness. Saul thought about that. How humans react to what they do not understand, how fear disguises itself as morality, protection, or necessary cruelty. His wife used to say that small minds need even smaller targets. Looking at Janelle, he fully understood what she meant. Then, an idea came without warning. "I'm going to make you a white dress," he said suddenly. Janelle blinked, confused by the specificity of his words. "Why?" "Because white means something. It means clean, new, worthy." Saul took down from his highest shelf a roll of fine white cotton, a fabric he had been saving for something special. "It means you are not what they say you are." Janelle looked down for a second. Something vulnerable crossed her expression before she buried it again under layers of learned hardness. "White gets dirty," she said. "White shows every stain." "Then we'll make it strong enough to be washed, tough enough to last." Saul spread the fabric across the work table. The lamplight made it glow with a soft sheen. "It's good fabric," he said. "It deserves to be worn by someone who will appreciate it." Janelle stepped forward, reaching toward the fabric. Her fingers brushed the surface, then pulled back immediately, as if afraid to contaminate it. Her hands were scarred, nails broken from hard work, not hands made for white dresses. "I can't pay for it," she murmured. "I'm not asking you to." "Then why?" The question was the same as in the alley, the same born from years when kindness always came with a hidden cost. Saul had no simple answer. Perhaps it was grief making him reckless. Perhaps 3 years of isolation making him crave a reason to exist beyond pain. Or perhaps he had simply looked into her eyes and seen someone worth seeing. "Because everyone deserves at least one thing that makes them feel they matter," he finally said. The words hung in the air, heavy, real. Janelle clenched her jaw. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "In my people's traditions, there are rules about clothing, about what colors mean, about who has the right to wear certain garments." Saul listened carefully, sensing the importance. "White is sacred," she said cautiously. "It's worn in ceremonies at important moments." She hesitated before continuing. "When a woman receives white clothing from someone who is not family, it means something specific. It means that person sees her as worthy of honor, of respect." Saul nodded calmly. "Good, because that is exactly what I mean." Janelle shook her head, worried. "You don't understand. In my tribe, when a man dresses a woman in white, he declares his intent. He says she has value. And if she accepts, if she wears what he made, she accepts that declaration." The weight of that seemed to fill the room. Janelle was giving him a chance to step back, not to cross a line she did not fully understand. But Saul looked at the rags she wore. He saw the shoulders hunched from years of imposed shame. He could not take back his offer. "Then I suppose I am making a declaration," he said quietly. "You don't even know me." "I know enough." Janelle watched him for a long time, searching for the trap, the hidden interest, the moment when kindness would prove false. But Saul remained there, calm, patient, waiting for her decision. Finally, Janelle nodded once, a small gesture with enormous weight. "If I accept this," she said cautiously, "if I wear what you make, there will be consequences. My people have long memories." "What kind of consequences?" She shook her head. "Finish the dress first, then we'll see if you still want me to have it." Outside, the rain struck the roof in a steady rhythm. Saul walked to the window and looked at the dark street. No movement, no lanterns. Everyone was sheltered under safe roofs with their families, with their certainties about who deserved compassion and who did not. When he turned, he found Janelle watching him. Her face mixed gratitude and fear, hope and resignation, like someone who had waited her whole life for something like this, but never believed it would truly happen. "Rest a little," Saul said, pointing to the bench near the stove where he had spread blankets. "I'll work all night. By morning you'll have something decent to wear." Janelle opened her mouth to protest, but closed it. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you." 2 simple words, yet insufficient for everything they contained. As Janelle settled on the bench and Saul sat at the Singer machine, neither of them knew that 3 days west, in the high mountains, scouts had already carried news. News that the chief's daughter had been seen. News that someone in a frontier settlement was showing her the respect that triggered ancient traditions and old obligations. and by dawn, 500 warriors would begin their journey, not to rescue her, not to punish anyone, but to witness what happened when someone finally treated their princess as someone worthy of honor. The rhythm of the Singer machine became the only sound in the world. Saul's feet moved the pedal with precision learned over years of work, while his hands guided the white fabric under the needle in firm lines. That night, he did not work at his usual pace. That night demanded speed without sacrificing quality. That night mattered in ways he was only beginning to understand. Janelle lay on the bench by the stove, but she was not asleep. Saul knew by the way she breathed, shallow and alert, watching him work with half-closed eyes. He wondered what she might be thinking, whether she believed he would actually finish, whether she had ever worn something made specifically for her body. The dress slowly took shape. He cut the fabric generously, taking her shoulders, height, and powerful build into account. Simple lines, no embellishments to make her feel like a spectacle, no exaggerations, just a clean structure that would fit well and move with her body instead of fighting against it. Near midnight, Janelle finally spoke. "You don't have to do this." Saul did not look up from his work. "I know." "Then why are you doing it?" He paused for a second, reflecting. The answer was deeper than words. He thought of his wife's last words before the fever took her. Take care of someone. Don't let grief make you useless. He thought of the 3 years in which he had become exactly that, a man so afraid of losing something that he stopped living entirely. "Because I can," he said finally. "Because I have the skill, the materials, and the time, and because you need it." "Need it," Janelle repeated, testing the word as if it did not belong to her. "I've survived without proper clothing for 2 years." "Surviving is not the same as living," Saul replied. The truth hung between them. Janelle sat, the blanket falling from her shoulders, and the firelight traced the angles of her face with soft shadows. Even exhausted and undernourished, it was striking. Not beautiful in the usual way people use the word, but beautiful like a mountain, imposing, undeniable, absolutely herself. "In my village," she said in a low voice, "my father wanted me to marry." Saul continued sewing, understanding that this story needed to be told, that it was an essential part of her. He had 3 chosen men, chiefs of allied tribes, men who could bring strength to our people. Her fingers intertwined in her lap. "I refused all 3, not because they were cruel or unworthy, but because they wanted me smaller, quieter." She let out a dry, joyless laugh. "They wanted a woman who stood behind them, bore children, and asked no questions." Her voice hardened. "But I was already taller than all of them, stronger than most of their warriors. How could I make myself less than I am?" "Were you banished? My father did it." Her answer was simple, but the weight of it was immense. "He said I had brought shame to my people by refusing to fulfill my duty, that a woman of my size should be grateful that someone wanted me." Her jaw tightened. "He gave me 1 day to leave. He said if I returned, I would be treated as an enemy." Saul's hands froze over the fabric. "Your own father is chief first, father second." Her bitterness was not exaggerated. It was deserved. Saul then understood why she had been living like an animal. She had been expelled from the only world that spoke her language, that knew her story. Forced to survive in places where she would always be too different to belong, too visible to hide. "And your mother died when I was 16. The fever took her like so many others." Janelle's expression softened slightly. "She used to tell me I was exactly as I was meant to be, that the Creator does not make mistakes, that one day someone would see me as I truly am." Saul lifted the dress from the table and examined the seams in the lamplight. It was almost finished. Just the hem and a few reinforcements on the shoulders remained. "She was right," he said. Janelle stood and approached, drawn by the sight of something made just for her. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the white fabric without daring to touch it. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Practical," Saul corrected. "Durable, simple, white enough to say something." "What does it say?" He looked up and met her eyes. "That you are exactly as you should be, and anyone who cannot see it is wrong, not you." Something shifted in her expression, a crack in the armor she had built over years. For a moment, Saul saw the girl she might have been before the world taught her to expect cruelty. When the sun rises, Janelle said carefully, things will change. In what way? My people have ways of knowing things. They must have already heard that someone showed me honor, that someone made me white clothing. Saul set the fabric aside. Then tell me what it means. But she shook her head. Finish the dress first. Put it on me. Then we'll see if you still feel the same when 500 warriors surround your home. The number hit him like cold water. 500. Not a small group, a whole tribe moving for a dress, for what that dress represented in her tradition. Saul looked at the white fabric in his hands, the hours of work, the simple act of human dignity that had become something enormous. He could stop. He could tell her to leave before dawn. He could save himself from what was coming with the morning light. But looking at Janelle standing beside him, he knew the truth. He had already made his choice. Then we better be ready, he said, and returned to the sewing machine. The needle pierced the fabric with a steady rhythm, each stitch binding him to consequences still unseen. Dawn arrived pale and cold. Saul set down the scissors after cutting the last threads and lifted the finished dress. His eyes burned from lack of sleep, and his fingers ached from hours of meticulous work. The garment was flawless, white cotton falling with elegance, seams reinforced to withstand her movements, a modest yet free neckline, wide sleeves for her strong arms, neither tight nor restrictive. Saul turned and found Janelle already awake, sitting on the bench, studying the dress with an expression impossible to read. Fear and desire mixed in her gaze like fire and water. Tomorrow only exists if I wear it, she whispered. Once I put it on, there's no going back. I understand, Saul replied. You don't understand, but you will, she countered. She approached the table as if holding something both fragile and dangerous. Once I wear it, everything will change. Agnes, remnants. Their fingers brushed briefly as she took the garment. Saul turned his back to give her privacy. He heard the soft rustle of the fabric as the old rags fell away, the whisper of white cotton sliding over Janelle's bare skin. Then came the silence, a heavy, charged silence. When she finally turned, the air seemed to stop in his chest. The transformation was not of the body, but of her posture. She was still the same woman, just as tall, just as powerful, with the same scars on her hands. But the dress changed the way she existed in the world. Her shoulders rose, her back straightened. Janelle held herself at her full height without apology. The white moved with her, as if it had always belonged to her story. How do I look? She asked, her voice smaller than she appeared. Saul stepped closer, feeling the weight of the moment. Like who you really are, he replied. Like someone who matters. Her eyes filled with tears she did not let fall. Tears that were not of pain but of something unknown, something recent. To be seen, to be acknowledged, to be accepted without conditions. Saul slowly raised his hand, palm up. Not a command, an invitation. Janelle stared at the hand for a long moment before placing hers on top. Thank you, she whispered. You shouldn't thank me for dignity, he said. In my world, dignity is the rarest thing, she murmured. They stood in the workshop without speaking, connected by the simple existence of the white dress. Outside, the settlement began to awaken, unaware of what was approaching. The rooster's crow broke the cold morning air. Some doors opened. Everything seemed normal. Then Janelle stiffened. Her entire body went rigid. She released Saul's hand and moved to the window in 3 long steps, her eyes fixed on the eastern horizon. They're coming, Saul said. At first, he saw only fog and dust. Then he noticed them. A dark line moving, growing, spreading. The sound arrived like a distant murmur that quickly became thunder. The pounding of hundreds of hooves on the hardened earth filled the air. How many? Saul asked, already knowing the answer. All of them, Janelle replied firmly. My father has sent all capable warriors. The dark line became individual figures, riders, dozens, hundreds. They moved with a precision that was not violent. They did not charge. They surrounded, extending in a circle around the settlement. Saul's workshop, on the edge of the town, was one of the first buildings enclosed. Saul could make out painted faces, feathered headdresses, weapons held not as threats but as part of a ritual. This was not an attack, it was something older. "What do they want?" Saul asked. She turned to him. The white dress caught the morning light. "They want to witness a bond," she replied softly. "You dressed me in white. You declared my worth according to my people's tradition. That binds you to me, and me to you." The thunder of the horses drew closer. The warriors shouted words that were not of war. They were songs, calls, sounds, speaking of something ceremonial. Her father would be among them, the chief who had expelled her, the man who denied her value, coming to see the man who had done what he had not. "What happens now?" Saul asked. Janelle fixed her eyes on his. "Now they will ask you to prove what you said, to show that you truly see me as worthy." The first riders entered the town. The ground vibrated under the weight of the horses. The settlement awoke with a roar that was not a storm. Windows shook, doors swung open, people poured into the streets, faces pale with fear. Samuel Bridger emerged from his office with a shotgun in his hands, red with panic. Other men appeared with rifles, forming a small defensive group in the middle of the main street. "Do not attack!" Saul shouted from the door. "They are not here for war." Samuel turned toward him. "How the hell do you know what they want?" Before Saul could respond, the circle of warriors opened. A single rider advanced. An older man, sun and time-weathered, wore a ceremonial headdress that distinguished him. Janelle tensed beside him. "My father," she murmured. The chief dismounted with a grace that contradicted his age. He advanced slowly, each step measured. When he was 20 paces away, he raised a hand in a universal sign of peace. The other warriors remained still. "I'm Chief Tehatan," he said in a clear voice. "I come not with weapons in my hand." He looked at Saul intently. "I come to speak with the man who dressed my daughter in white." The man who introduced himself as Tahatan studied Saul with a gaze that seemed to pierce the skin. He assessed his hands, his posture, his calmness, as if measuring not his physical strength, but the weight of his choices. "Do you know what you have done?" he asked firmly. Saul did not look away. "I made a dress because she needed it." The chief nodded slowly, as if expecting a different, emptier answer. "You gave her white cloth, measured her body with your own hands. You spent the night creating something that honored what she is, not what others wanted her to be." Tahatan continued, raising his voice so all could hear. "Do you know what that means for my people?" Saul took a deep breath. "She told me that dressing her in white was to declare her worth." Janelle remained still, the dress glowing in the morning light. "It is more than that," Tahatan replied. "You declared that you were willing to take responsibility for her well-being, that you saw her as valuable when her own people threw her into the cold." Silence fell heavily over the settlement. "When I exiled my daughter 2 years ago," the chief continued, "I convinced myself it was necessary. I thought bringing shame to the tribe endangered our alliances. I thought her strength made her impossible to unite with anyone." His words hit like stones. Janelle clenched her fists but did not move. "I was wrong," said Tahatan with a crack in his voice. "A father should never convince himself that his daughter has no worth." He took 3 steps forward. "You saw in one night what I did not see in 20 years. You gave her dignity when I gave her exile. You treated her as a treasure when I treated her as a disposable burden." The 500 mounted figures remained silent, witnesses to a public confession that had never occurred in generations. "Our tradition says," he continued, "that one who honors one of ours when we have failed demonstrates a wisdom that shames us. And it also says that if that man stands firm in the light of day before his own people and ours, he has proven himself worthy of her." The air seemed to freeze. Then Tahatan raised his voice. "Saul, before 500 warriors and all your people, I ask you, do you uphold what the white dress declares? Do you still believe she is worthy of honor, respect, and protection?" Every gaze fixed on him. Samuel slowly lowered the barrel of his shotgun. Janelle held her breath. Saul looked at Janelle, the woman who had eaten scraps in an alley, who had been called a monster, who had been exiled. Then he turned his gaze back to the chief. I respect every stitch I made. I do not take back a single one. She has worth, she has honor, and anyone who does not see it chooses to be blind. His words resonated clearly in the air. Tahatan raised his hand. The warriors dismounted in unison. The sound of 500 boots striking the ground vibrated like controlled thunder. I recognize this bond, proclaimed the chief aloud. Saul has honored my daughter when her own tribe could not. He has proven his worth through actions, not words, through sacrifice and generosity. Janelle released a quiet sob she had held back. In 3 days, Tahatan continued, we will celebrate the ceremony right here before both peoples. Until then, my daughter will remain under the protection of this man. Janelle could no longer hold back her tears. They were not tears of pain. They were the tears of 2 years of solitude, of believing that no one would ever choose her. The warriors began breaking camp around the settlement, not as a threat, but as a sign of permanence. Samuel approached Saul slowly, incredulous. Do you know what you've just done? I do, Saul replied. In 3 days you will marry that woman before the whole territory. Saul looked at Janelle. She stood tall in the white dress, like a queen returned to her throne. Yes. Samuel frowned, unable to understand why. Why choose her? Why risk all of this? Saul remembered the alley, the hungry eyes, the shoulders hunched in shame. Because no one should live believing they do not deserve to be seen, he said softly. In the days that followed, the settlement changed. Men stopped their chatter. Women watched with quiet respect. Children looked at Janelle without fear, only with curiosity. Tahatan observed his daughter from a distance, learning how she moved when she no longer tried to hide. He saw a strength he had never wanted to understand. He saw dignity where before he had seen defiance. The day of the ceremony arrived with a clear sun. The warriors formed a wide circle. The town gathered in reverent silence. Janelle walked toward Saul, dressed in white, head held high, shoulders firm. Tahatan placed his hands over theirs. He spoke ancient words about honor, union, and healing what had been broken. It was not a wedding for just 2 people. It was a bridge between 2 worlds. When it was over, there were no war cries, no gunshots, only silence, a silence full of meaning. 500 warriors bowed, not for their mission, but out of respect. That night, while the fire burned high, Janelle and Saul sat together. She no longer trembled, no longer shrank. He was no longer alone. 2 souls that had been broken had found a place to stay. And thus, the story remained on the frontier. The story of the man who sewed a white dress for a woman everyone called a monster, and of how 500 warriors came not to fight, but to witness the birth of a new destiny.